Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the New Mainstream podcast. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco. Today, I'm speaking with someone who's spent her career at the intersection of science, communications, and culture. Jenna Marston is a communications manager at BASF, where she leads efforts to engage a diverse workforce through creative, inclusive, and multilingual messaging. Her journey has taken her from biology labs to the global communication stage, and today we'll explore how she helps brands speak authentically across geographies, backgrounds, and languages. Jenna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited for this conversation. We spoke a little bit in a previous meeting, and I feel like we on just one of the topics we could have a whole podcast. So excited to jump in. But before we get in, let's talk a little bit about your journey. You have a unique background, starting in biology and then evolving into a leader in science, communications, brand strategies. Can you share a little bit about how your path unfolded and what drew you specifically to the communication space?
Sure. So, long story long, essentially, going all the way back to in high school, where I was very serious as a student, a very serious student athlete. So, I had a big goal growing up that I wanted to play Division I softball in college. And I knew that in order to do that, I needed to focus on my grades and I needed to focus on my craft and my skill, which at that time was softball. But I didn't spend a lot of time thinking too much about what comes next after softball. Um, and so when I got to college, my freshman year, I did spend quite a lot of time trying to figure it out, as anyone does. And it was my sophomore year during, my softball career that I had an injury and I started doing physical therapy. And the idea and concept of how the human body is connected in a giant puzzle was really interesting to me. I do love puzzles. And so I thought, you know what, this would be a great way, a good pathway. I could help people and constantly be in that problem solving space. I also really liked the trajectory of being in physical therapy. So the pathway was very straightforward, which, as someone who had always had very clear direction and milestones to hit to meet goals, that sounded like a good thing for me. But it was in my senior year that I was in an introductory to physical therapy course, and it hit me that the day to day life and practices of physical therapy may not be for me. So, right after that class, I actually went to my coach's office and said, I don't know what I'm doing. I need to completely change my major, change direction. This is not it. Well, the NCAA has a rule to stay academically eligible, 20-40-80 rule, and that's the percent of your collegiate degree that you need to have complete so we stay on track towards graduation. And so there was not a good way to change my major and stay academically eligible, and my coach had to talk me down. I was like, you know what? Lots of people go do careers completely different than their degree. Hang in there. And through many discussions, she was fantastic because she really cared about us as people, not just athletes. She pointed out that I was doing all these extracurriculars with our sports marketing department at my school, trying to help drive people to the game. I was, doing Greeks at the game and trying to figure out some guerrilla marketing strategies, papering the entire campus with information about our games, just trying to drive attendance. And she's like, that's the job and a career. And so working with her, I ended up applying for our master's program for journalism and mass communications and getting into that. And I really found a place where I had natural skills. It's, the relationship building, it's that storytelling, and all of a sudden, things became fun. And I was able to find my passion in that way. But then when I was graduating, I didn't quite have a plan yet in place. I knew I wanted to move on and, start my career. And my teachers put me in touch with someone who actually graduated from our program, who was working at Dow's agriculture business at the time. And we had a conversation, and I found myself interviewing for a R&D, or research and development communications role. The vice president of R&D at the time was looking to add in a communications person because he realized the value that communications could bring to the organization. And with me having that science background as well as the communications background, it kind of was that perfect marriage, and it set me apart. And before I knew it, I was moving to Indianapolis and starting my career. And I got to tell my parents, see, I had it planned the whole time. You all were worried for nothing. And then from there, I've just been able to build on experiences and learning, and, find my way. It's not necessarily as straight as the physical therapy path would have been. It's more of a wave, um, but I'm along for the ride.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, so many great like nuggets in there. So one, I mean, I think we just have to acknowledge how in high school you said you were going to be a D1 athlete and you were. I don't know if people listening to the podcast realize how big of a deal that is. Like there's probably millions of kids that play sports. There's tens of thousands of collegiate athletes, but on the D1 level, there's only several thousand. So we only think of like professionals, but D1 is um, is an amazing feat. So I have to say congratulations to that. That's awesome. And I also like what I take away from that too is like regardless of what you're focusing on just putting 100% of it. I mean, I think it was important for how you stated that you didn't necessarily think about what the next step was, and maybe that sounded like a mistake at the time, but I don't. I think that's if putting yourself 100% in something pays off in the long run. I think that's what your story shows. Even with the physical therapy, like I think you completed that in undergrad, um, and that was worth finishing. And I think it led you to a career that you were really passionate about, and now full circle, right? It's all coming together, which is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. It is so funny. You have to have those long-term goals, right? So reaching that collegiate level was my long-term goal, but when I got there, it was having to restart that process of one, enjoy reaching that milestone in my life, but also realizing that there's still a what's next. So no matter what field you're in or what experience level you may be, we always have to find that right balance. But if you're passionate and are willing to put time in mastering a craft or a skill set, I think there's value.
Do you still play softball like recreationally?
No, my arms and my knees, all my wheels and joints they're all broken.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can imagine. I know a lot. Yeah, baseball, softball. You're the repeated throwing. Um, so was your you mentioned a little bit about your career. So your first job out of college was Dow. Can you tell us a little bit about? Um, I know you've worked at some other big names. Like how did you get to BASF?
Yeah, so I started in Dow's agriculture business. It was again one of those happy accidents because I didn't go seeking out agriculture as an industry. But if you want to find a group of really passionate people who have a true purpose in life, go work in the agriculture industry, because the scientists to the sales team, they're all going to work with the purpose and passion of feeding the world population. The work that they're doing is so important, and it comes with all of these other dynamics at play. And so, as a new professional, that passion and excitement was very contagious. And one of the things that I got to do that is still something I think of so fondly, and a great moment for me in my communications development, was we had these scientists who were going out into the community and doing STEM outreach, talking to kids of all ages. We say kids from 1 to 92. Um, and helping them understand the science that we were doing. And it was, particularly important from a communication standpoint because we were at the height of kind of that anti-GMO movement and, helping tell that narrative and get people to understand and break through the misinformation. It's easy to maybe not trust a big company. I get it when people have questions. As a professional, I'm here to help answer questions. Um, but when you have someone who has that passion that I just spoke of, they're doing a science experiment and happy to engage and answer those questions, it really makes it hard to continue to have that mistrust or think of the company as being bad because you have this fantastic person in front of you. That person isn't bad, and you help see that. And it was a real learning moment for me as a in the communication space because it really was that first step in understanding how people and personal narratives and the true you know guiding principles that people can share and seeing that impact that it has on people. But Dow AgroSciences was a wonderful time, and then Dow and DuPont went through a major merger. I think one of the biggest mergers in U.S. history, and they spun out Dow, so they're still a Dow. They spun out DuPont, they're still a DuPont, but we were spinning out a brand new agriculture company, and so for professional development purposes, and because somebody thinks I'm creative, um, they put me on the brand team. So I got to help build and launch a brand new, huge brand, and launch it on the New York Stock Exchange and work with an amazing team. And I got to learn from, people who had a wealth of brand experience, great agency partners at a scale that most people don't get to experience. So I was very lucky to have been able to go through that. But after we had gotten launched, we had gotten into, the COVID space that, had its own unique challenges, but it wasn't taking me on the growth journey that I was looking for. Remember balancing those long-term and short-term milestones. And so I took a leap of faith, moved to Houston, Texas to lead and be the lead global brand and communications manager for another agricultural company. It was smaller, it was private, but it was going to put me in a more dynamic leadership role so I could have that growth. They had never had a global branding or communications person before. When I came on, they had multiple versions of their logo because all the sites were kind of acting independently. There wasn't a clear, concise communication strategy. There wasn't even a way to send a communication to every employee in the company when I came on. So we had to build a lot of things from scratch. But when I took the role, I truly understood that if they were bringing someone in as a private company that was having great growth in market share, they were going to be looking at one of two things most likely, and that was either to take the company public or potentially sell it. So I knew that it was maybe not going to stay the way it was, long term, but taking the risk, and it was to sell the company. And actually, my former company that I had left was the one who bought it. It made great sense from a portfolio standpoint. And when my leader told me that we were going to sell the company, I even was like, oh, I think my old company is going to be the one who buys us. And it, you know, in some ways you're like, oh, wow, that's unique. But in other ways, as a professional, it just goes to show how important it is to build those relationships and, maintain those relationships. So that when the acquisition was announced, I got to help lead a lot of that M&A activity as a communications person. Again, it was one of those moments that not every communicator gets to have in their professional, career. It was a $1.5 billion acquisition. So it wasn't small. And so getting to work on those, investor narratives and customer narratives and employee narratives to bring everything together was really exciting. I got them through integration. Um, but once again, I ended up being in a place where it was leading me more into a marketing path because I knew the portfolios. And while I was enjoying working with my marketing teammate, um, I wanted to stay more in that communication space. And so once again, you just kind of have to jump and hope for the best. And BASF had a great reputation. And one of the things, as I was, in my global role, working with all of these sites um, at Stoller, the, the company that had gotten bought, I was realizing that, wow, our sites have all these unique challenges. And I wanted to understand them better. And so taking on this site communications role for BASF has been a strategic decision of mine because it is challenging me to learn what it's like to be at that site level, because there's so many different dynamics that you don't think about if you are a communicator, sitting far removed from that. But you're trying to make the best decisions possible. So this is another great, building and learning moment that I'm lucky to have.
That's great. And I think the thing that sticks out to me when you're talking about this experience, one, as in your role, you've got to do so many amazing things that maybe people in their careers maybe get to do once if they're lucky, right? You've got to um, help through an acquisition like phase, help through taking a company public. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And I think this word is thrown around a lot, but I think another takeaway was your authenticity. You were mentioning about how people in agriculture are so passionate and how it's hard to not trust somebody that's passionate and, you know, sharing, being transparent. I think so much of that is being authentic. And at the end of the day, so many brands, so many companies are chasing authenticity, and you can't do it if the people on the ground that are communicating your message aren't authentic. And I don't know, that's kind of what stuck with me from a communications perspective, that as an individual representing a company, you have to be able to be authentic. And if a company can't give you that, then it's impossible for a brand to be authentic. I don't know if that's making sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the other areas that I find that I feel lucky as a communications professional is the types of industries and companies I've worked for. They're really solving all these big problems and challenges and providing things that until you're in it, you kind of take for granted. So, you know, BASF, we're, making materials that ensure the paint can help paint your house, or car parts, or you know things that package our food to keep it safe during the food supply chain and reduce food waste through spoilage. The carpet that you have in your home probably has BASF products in it. It's incredibly interesting when, especially maybe to me, I don't know, maybe other high schoolers were thinking about these things while I was thinking about my softball career. But, these industries have opened up my eyes as, an individual, to realize, wow, all of these things have to get made, and there's a lot of steps to make it happen.
Yeah, and so let's dive a little bit into BASF. You had mentioned you chose it specifically to be able to kind of get on the ground and learn more about sites. And I think one thing that stood out about the site that you work on specifically for me in our conversation was about how the BASF's Freeport site is incredibly diverse workforce. Um, I want to chat a little bit about challenges, opportunities that come with engaging employees that represent such a wide, not only cultural range, but one of the quotes from our conversation you mentioned is from GED to PhDs. I mean, I think that's something about an aspect of diversity we don't talk about a lot, educational diversity. Um, yeah, would love to dive into that more, like what your perspective on that.
Yeah, so diversity and cultural dynamics come from many forms, like you said. And working on a manufacturing site, we do have people from all different levels, from engineers with who knows how many different degrees and letters behind their name, and tremendous experience, and technicians, and contractors, and they're all an important part of this puzzle in this creating these products that we all need and rely on and use every day. But as a communications professional, you have to think through, how are you reaching them, not just with a story and narrative that makes sense to them, but additionally, meeting them quite literally where they are in physical location. So an engineer or a technician may be out in the plant all day, not sitting at a desk waiting for your perfectly crafted email to come through their desk. So you have to think through, how am I going to have them see this message or get the information that they need in a timely manner? And then additionally, in a manufacturing site, we have shift work that we have to think about. That's something I've never had to think through as a communications professional before. So it's been a challenge, and something I'm still kind of working on to figure out what the right timing is, because if you wait to send a message, you may miss an entire shift that needed to know that information, because it went out and they didn't see it because they were not at the site for a week or two. But if you send it too many times or send it too early, does it become stale by the time that you need the action to be taken, or does it become so annoying that the people just want to tune you out, and then none of your messages get through in the future either? So it's definitely finding a balance. And from a communication standpoint, it has been tough, and I've been trying to figure it out. And that's where feedback really comes into play, and asking about those cultural dynamics and trying to understand, and then adjusting, and then looking at other data points too, because of course, everyone's going to have their opinions on whether or not the communications plan worked. So as you're building your strategy as a professional, getting that early buy-in, and then getting the feedback, of course, but then also looking at the data. So I'm sure all of us have heard, nobody got the email, or nobody reads the email, or no one did what they were supposed to. But then you are like, wait, though, we had this turnout of attendance, so I think some people saw it, or we had this click-through rate, or whatever your quantitative metrics can be on that end too, to help have those conversations are important from a communications professional. At least that's how I try to approach it, is balancing the two.
And is like, because we have some researchers that listen, like, are surveys ever part, or focus groups? Do you ever, like, as a communication professional, kind of utilize some of those types of research tools, or are you just talking to people one on one?
Yeah, you know it's both. It's as a my approach is, I will literally stop people in the hallway and ask them, and have one-on-one, like, impromptu conversations. um I When I first started as the R&D communications person at Dow AgriSciences, I would go suit up in the lab coat and the safety glasses, and stand there and ask um, the scientists what they were doing and why they were doing it, and try to get feedback on what's working. I'm trying to do a similar approach, as a professional, because I like to try to go where our target audience is and meet them where they are, because if you can physically be in their environment, I find that it also helps get people to open up. It's a little harder at the plant because there's more dynamics, and it's much more spread out. um, but having those conversations, and then of course, as a professional, you should always be using the tools that you have. So can you send out a quick pulse check survey? sometimes it could be just a one question silly thing on like an intranet type page, how are you doing today? And you can find out a lot from your workforce on participation rate and how they answer that simple question. Um, so it's definitely finding the balance and using both. Communications is much squishier than a hard science, scientific process, but it's still very much the same. You have a hypothesis, you try and change one variable at a time. So you keep tweaking until you find the right solution.
Yeah, I like the fact that you're measuring things, right? I mean, I think many people, maybe not in the communications field, think of it as a soft skill, which there's a lot of parts to that. I'm sure, but you're measuring like, did people take the action? Did people click or open the email? So I think that's great that you're incorporating some KPIs into communications work. Um, Another part of your career journey that I found really interesting, that is the fact you've worked at multinational companies, corporations. So you're not only dealing with diversity at a site level, you're quite literally dealing with it from a country perspective. And I thought, now BASF, right, the parent organization is a German organization. I'm curious, like, how you've navigated those multi-country dynamics in your work, right? Being in the US, but having a parent company that's in Europe, and Germany has its own um, set of cultural norms to navigate. Like, would love to learn a little bit about how you're navigating that aspect of your job.
Yeah, I mean, working, whether a company is, based in the US or Europe or Africa or South America or Asia, they all have different dynamics that you're working through. I've been at a US company where we had a larger US audience and then global, and then a US company that actually was more global audience than US, specifically South America. And now having it be a little bit reversed. Of course, that's been interesting, but even looking at the United States, right? Um, if a company is sitting here in Texas versus California versus New York, they're going to have different cultural dynamics too. That's shaping their company culture. And as a communications professional, we really need to think through and understand what those cultural differences are, because that's how we need to start framing the narrative or the story. Um, to reach that audience. I call it the so what. Why should anybody care? Why is this person going to care about what you want them to know or what you want them to do? Um, and I challenge my coworkers and stuff all the time. I'm like, okay, but what's the so what for the communications element? Because feeding more data and more information isn't always the right thing. Um, we're so busy in this day and age, and our attention spans have gotten even shorter. So, getting to the point is really important when we're trying to deliver a message. Um, and then thinking through, how are those cultural dynamics impacting the so what? So you can kind of frame it backwards. And if you don't know the cultural dynamic, ask. It's okay. You don't have to know every culture around the world as a professional. I certainly don't. I've learned a lot. Coming to Texas, I came to Texas 2 years ago. Well, going on three years ago, and it's been a huge change for me. I grew up in the Midwest, and being down in the southern part of Texas, here in Houston, we have 120 different languages that get spoken, and you wouldn't see that maybe in a Nebraska or in Indiana, and just learning from all of these different stories. I think as a communications professional, you really have to love learning about people and knowing their stories. So then that way you can better understand what makes them tick. So that way you can get to their so what. Because it doesn't matter if you have a great idea or a great invention, if no one knows about it or cares to know about it because you're not talking about it, in a way that helps solve their problem, your invention or idea isn't going to go very far.
I love that, and because it's so relevant, right, to marketing as well. And obviously, there's a lot of um, similarities between marketing and communications. But yeah, getting at that so what is a great way to frame it. And building on talking about 120 different languages there in Texas, I'm sure I know multilingual communications is a big part of your job now as well. Like, how do you deal with that in terms of ensuring messages land across different languages? And of course, I deal with that from a research perspective. We're translating into Mandarin, Japanese, languages I don't speak, but have to trust that there's good translators that are getting that survey message across. How do you navigate that when now working for a global company and maybe having to send communications out that gets at that so what, but that's in different languages.
Yeah, if you're a communicator working for a multinational company, you're used to having to do translation on some of the key messages. A lot of times, maybe your regional team will handle that. Um, one of the, but again, coming down here and being, where we are geographically in the world, it it has made me think and be a little bit more sensitive and empathetic to that approach and the need for translation. So um, it really, really was a big deal in my last role. Maybe 5 to 10% of our employee population were native English speakers. Everyone spoke English. But, as I said, I was working with all these different sites as the global comms lead, and I was having a one-on-one with someone, and I could tell during that one-on-one finally that there was a lot getting lost in, the conversation, because my Spanish is what it is and her English is what it was. And um, we're both very good and competent at what we do. And I just realized that, wow, I needed to change my approach as a communications leader in order for her to achieve one, what I needed her to do from taking a global campaign and localizing it and implementing it in a way that, I wanted it to be, implemented, but also to help me get the best from her, because we had this very talented, dynamic individual that her ideas were probably getting lost in the shuffle. So, it doesn't have to be fancy. Of course, there's technologies that are helping improve that. But, we started just a little side chat during meetings where we did have some people who were very fluent in both English and Spanish, because of the households they had grown up in. And, I approached them and was like, hey, can you help with this? And so if someone didn't understand something that I had said, we had told them, it's okay, raise your hand, we can slow down. And we would have some sidebar conversations to make sure that everyone during a meeting was able to come along for it from a strategy standpoint. When you're thinking about that and multiplying it out, you can't necessarily do that when you're trying to reach all of your employees at once. And so that's where, we we committed to translating everything in Spanish and Portuguese based off of our employee population. And then we would add in other languages based off of need, working with our regional teams. But our global team took that on for me in that role, just because it made me hyper aware and hypersensitive to how important it is. And it's also important because we want everyone to feel included. And if you're not being spoken to in, your language, it's hard to feel included. Um, and so it built an additional level of trust with me as, the global comms person. People realized I was there. I'm on your side. Sometimes I think as comms people, employees look at us and I'm like, oh, okay, what are you doing? Or you can't be trusted. You're, for whatever reason. And we have to build the trust, because that's how we get the stories, that's how we get action, that's how we hear and get the feedback that we need. And so the more we can show as professionals that we are here to help our employees, or well, whoever our audience is, and again, it's meeting them where they are. So having a good translation service is important. If anyone needs one here in Houston, you can message me on LinkedIn. I'll share mine. But we do our best.
That's great. I mean, I believe it or not, we're almost at the end of our podcast. Like I mentioned, we could deep dive into this so much. I think our listeners got a lot out of this, so really appreciate it. Want to end on a little fun section that's a little bit selfish because I've been getting some great book and podcast and show recommendations, but it's fun to ask people what they're either reading or listening to or even streaming. So anything that you've been into lately that you would recommend?
So being in communications, I love any book or podcast that is kind of about understanding people and where they're coming from, and reading them. So much of our communication is actually nonverbal through body language. Um, so one of the books that I find myself listening to on repeat, because I drive a lot in my current role, is by Chris Voss. He was a former hostage negotiator, and it's called Never Split the Difference. And it talks about how to navigate high stake negotiating, situations. And if you can do that, then you're an excellent communicator. If you can find your way through something, tense situation like that, like a hostage situation. So it's I like to re-listen to it on occasion. So that's why I think I'm going to give the recommendation, just to help sharpen the saw. And I think I pick up something new every time I re-listen to it, and because it's all communication, techniques and tactics. And I think, you know, understanding people and reading people and being reminded that we are not the same. We are not coming and approaching the situation the same. So if you try to negotiate from your perspective, you're going to fail. You have to think of what's there, so what? And that's how you can have a better negotiating. And so it's in the book.
Yeah, and I can second that. I've read that book. Fun fact: the year before I went to USC for business school, he had a negotiate. Chris Voss taught at USC, and so one of my friends actually got to take that class with him in person, which is pretty awesome.
I'm pretty jealous about that. Pretty jealous.
Yeah, I missed it by a year. I took a negotiation class as well, but it definitely wasn't Chris Voss level. Um, but Jenna, thank you so much. There's been like a master class in strategic inclusive communication. If people want to connect with you, sounds like is LinkedIn the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, that's probably the best way. Jenna Marston on LinkedIn. I mean, my Instagram handle JLMarston11 is open, but you're gonna just get a bunch of dog pics if if you come follow me there. So if you love dogs, then there you go.
Yeah, who doesn't? Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.